afield.
Silent all around the line. If they get the chance, they were born in bloody circumstance. To go, leave me, run like you've never run before. From the underground, given room to breathe, not puppy drowned. So die if you get the chance. Better men than you've been, let this dance. So go, leave me, run like you've never run before. I've seen the worst, and there is nothing left for me to hate, so I can lay me down, my brothers, on the ground. I bled today until Coyote comes to raise me up and carries me.
Welcome to the Scottish Rugby podcast brought to you by the Scottish Rugby blog. I am Cammy Black. We are back after a very short break. We did some Patreon episodes in the meantime, but here we are back on the main podcast. Welcome to any new listeners that are finding us in advance of the World Cup, and people who may be new to rugby are just as welcome as those that have followed the sport for a long time. We don't profess to be experts. We don't profess to know what we're talking about. We're just here for a good old chat. And joining me this evening for that chat, we have Ian Hay. Good evening, Ian.
Good evening, Cammy, and everyone else, or wherever you're listening.
When you're ready, Ian. In your own time, Ian.
So I thought we should say a delay just in case.
What?
That was it. Yeah, that's I can reach for the swear button, which I should just say this proportion of the podcast for patrons, and we'll come on to patrons in a minute for any new listeners, is swear free. So I'll just remind Ian of that before we get any further. The second part of the podcast, which is patrons only, is not swear free.
That's why I chuckled to myself. I chuckled to myself when you said, "Oh, we're back after a break. We've done some Patreon episodes." I was like, "All right, okay. In which case, I'll turn off the swear button."
Well done, Ian. Thank you. Duly noted.
everyone
We've also got
frozen?
Johnny McGinty. Good evening,
Yeah.
Johnny.
Hello,
Right.
how are we doing?
And we've got Craig Manson as well. Hello, Craig.
Hi, how are we doing?
Ian's looking confused. Have we confused you? Have we lost you already, Ian?
No, it just seems there's a bit of a. Oh, I've got rubbish signal.
There you
I'm
go.
only
You've
getting
got
one
there's a
band
lag on Ian's
Wi-Fi.
Wi-Fi. Well, that'll no doubt hopefully
There's-
sort itself out as the
Yeah.
evening wears on. So you can we put this podcast out every week, roughly during the season when there's rugby to talk about. We do a main podcast that goes out on all your favorite podcast apps: Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. I don't know if that's still a thing. Spotify, Amazon Podcasts. You can listen to us on Alexa. Say, Alexa, play Scottish Rugby Podcast, and we are the podcast that will play for you. You can also watch us live. We're broadcasting live on YouTube, Twitter, and Twitch this evening. I don't know, is it still called Twitter or is it x.com? No, I don't know.
I think it is x.com. By the way, I always love how you say we're available
It's
on all your
X.
favorite podcast apps and then name all the worst podcast apps.
And are there better ones? I don't know. I lost track. Do people still listen to TuneIn Radio? Is that still the thing?
I don't know. I use Podcast Addict. That's my favorite podcast
Well,
app.
there you go. Is it a free plug for Podcast Addict? Yeah, we also
I think
broadcast
that's what it's called. I should check that.
we broadcast the podcast live, and then it goes out as an audio recording for people who prefer their podcast that way. You can also subscribe to our Patreon, which is patreon.com/Scottish Rugby Podcast from £3 a month. And in return, you will get a bonus weekly episode as well as some other bonus content as well. That's normally where we cut a little bit more loose in that podcast and have a bit more fun. Not that this podcast isn't fun. I'm selling ourselves short. I will just opening by saying, did you all know? And I'm gonna come up with a little snippet of history, sporting history every week ahead of these as we go through the World Cup, and our listenership hopefully increases and we get a bit more exposure. Did you know that the FA banned women's football in 1921? Does anyone have a guess about the reason for that ban?
If I just say the patriarchy, will that count?
It is the patriarchy. Well done, Johnny. The FA's consultative committee ruling stated complaints have been made as to football being played by women. The council felt impelled to express the strong opinion that the game of football is quite unsuitable for females and should not be encouraged. So there you go. That was the FA banned it in 1921. That ban went for 50 years. And they say women's football is still recovering. It was more popular than men's football at the time in the post-war. It used to get crowds of 53,000 plus at places like Wembley, which just goes to show, there are decisions made throughout history that are frowned upon and looked back on as huge mistakes, as we hope one day soon the SRU will realise when they overturn their ban on transgender participation in rugby in Scotland. We'll be coming up with a fact about the history of the poor treatment of women throughout history, throughout the entire World Cup, and still talking about the SRU's flawed decision to ban transgender participation in rugby in Scotland. Anyway, on with the podcast. We've had lots of bits of news since we've been away. There's some things to catch up for some of our listeners who are not patrons. Some other bits and bobs. Craig, the big news for Edinburgh this week is you now have not a head coach, a first team coach, an assistant to the head coach. You've appointed Gareth from the office.
It's like first team lead coach or something like that.
I first things first, I've even forgotten his name. I'm trying to be positive, but I haven't been very positive since the news came out, and I was very angry. And it's the first time I've been really angry about something, to the level of John Anderson angry about it, because really. First of all, again, I've forgotten his name, so if any of you guys can help me out with that'd be awesome.
I'm just enjoying watching you. I'm really enjoying watching you struggle, Craig.
Yeah, and I should have. I was so angry that I'm also getting old.
You instantly forgot his name.
Instantly forgot his name. My main concern really is the fact that it's on a 1-year deal. He's the first of the. How can you put it? He's the lead coach. I think it's his lead coach.
And senior coach.
senior coach.
Sean Everett is his name. And he's
Sean
listed
Everett
as
from,
senior
and,
coach.
and he spent some time at the Bulls, and then he was at the Sharks, I believe, and he's talked of very highly. Because I have consulted those that are in the know that have played for the Sharks, and he is he's very highly thought of. But my concern, and I think I'm hoping it's visa controlled that's the problem. But giving him a 1-year deal really is a suck it and comes across as a suck it and see, and I don't think the fans deserve it. I don't think the players deserve it, because we've got a fantastic roster of players, some absolute stonking players in our team that could quite easily get to a point where if they think, well, if we're only getting a coach for a year to see how it goes, I'm going to look around and maybe when it's time for me to move on, I'll move on. And then again, it's not very good for him either, because he can't really get himself. If he's here for a year, maybe he's just sucking it to see if his family like it in Scotland. I don't know, but I'm just very underwhelmed.
Steve Diamond is continuing as the lead rugby consultant, which suggests, Johnny, that there are other rugby consultants currently employed by Edinburgh, that they need a lead rugby consultant.
Can just pick who they want to give the job to and give them the job, and actually give them the job. Stop making up pretend in charge names for all these people that they've got, but they don't really want to be in charge. They clearly don't want Steve Diamond to be in charge, or he doesn't want to be in charge. Otherwise, he'd be the head coach.
Have you seen property prices in Edinburgh?
Fair, yeah. Steve Diamond's not buying a house.
He's mad into property. Steve Diamond. There's nobody's property prospecting in Edinburgh these days.
He might go full Darcy and get himself a camper van. They obviously, I don't know. I think Craig's maybe right. I don't know if they see Sean Everett as the answer, or they'd have made him head coach or director of rugby, and they'd have given him a proper contract instead of making him lead coach. Does he report to the lead rugby consultant, or who's actually in charge? What's the structure? Who does what? It's all a bit murky for my liking. I'm not even
I don't want the team that I love and that I support to be led by committee, and it seems to be being led by committee. And you can see what with the under-20s, what a good job Jim Mallander's doing at the moment. So I don't want it just seems to be at this moment in time that I haven't to be like John Anderson was when last year when Glasgow got the new head coach. I am unimpressed and unconvinced at this moment in time.
See, that is one thing I'd say in his favour, is that's what we all said about Franco Smith when he came to Glasgow last year, and that was 1 year, one European final, and one URC playoff ago. So
yeah, but Franco Smith has been lead coach or head coach. God, I'm getting down the route of lead coach there. He's been head coach of Benetton. He was also then the international coach for Italy, so he knows how to run a team, and this seems to be very committee-ish.
And he was head coach. He was appointed not senior coach. Yeah, he was appointed. Frank was appointed on a 1-year deal, to be fair. But Ian, there's a suggestion, and I'm giving you time to finish your mouthful. There's a suggestion that, from Mark Dodson, that more appointments are coming, and even kind of indicating that they may wait till after the World Cup or close to the World Cup, perhaps just to see who may or may not be available.
Yeah, so is Sean Everett
an holding appointment?
Yeah, and is he happy with that? If he's happy with that, it's fine enough. Or like Craig was saying, maybe it's a visa thing. But if he said there's more appointments, plural, how many coaches is he needing? Is it going to be a massive overhaul? Does he mean skills positions?
The rumor was that Brad Moore was up for it. Now, whether it's he's now with Scotland for the duration of the World Cup, whether or not there is discussions that have been had, say, well, let's see how the World Cup goes, and then I'll see where I am, or I might be interested in Edinburgh. Let's suck it and see. So there's that. I think there was a couple of other names that were still in the frame, and they're ones that I think are within the system. So again, whether or not it's a let's just see how things go, Craig. But that's not it's not ideal prep
That's
for the season.
And it's also then sort of like what the. So if Scotland fail, Edinburgh get it Bradmore, or if they do well, will other people come
They
in
get
ahead
Bradmore,
of
I don't
Edinburgh and
know.
offer them more money? Yeah. So
and also, you know, and you know, we've said the word "suck it and see" 3 or 4 times, and to be perfectly honest, that's the wrong attitude to take with your season ticket holders. It's the wrong attitude to take with your fans, and it's the wrong attitude to take with one of 2 of your professional clubs in Scotland. I don't want a suck it and see. I don't want somebody here who is on a year's deal and is constantly worried about either his job or his visa or if his family's going to love the place. I want someone here to do a job. You know, no disrespect to Mike Blair, but you know, we can't be in a worse place at this moment in time because of where we ended up in the league. So, you know, Scotland, you know, the SRU need to get their act together. Almost swore, Cammy. There you go. See, I controlled it.
You did well done.
Thank you. They need to get this together because we don't deserve. And Edinburgh doesn't deserve as a club, and the players don't deserve a suck it and see. They deserve. This is your head coach. This is the guy that's going to lead you for the next 3 or 4 years.
this is where we can use "Welcome to the party, pal."
Yeah, I know.
But I mean, speaking of welcome party, pal, I mean, I think it's always been the case, or my perception anyway. I think because Glasgow are detached from Murrayfield, like geographically, and maybe even spiritually a little bit, but geographically, that they seem to be able to do things their own way at Glasgow, whereas with Edinburgh there seems to be more SRU interference, and I don't know if that's just a perception of how things go. I'm not being a kind of like, oh, you know, the SRU are are always investing in Edinburgh. I think it actually counts against them sometimes as well. I do wonder whether there's, you know, Al Kellogg. You know, Al Kellogg is able to kind of go and bring in who he wants and do what he wants over in Glasgow, and everyone leaves him alone. But it seems like Edinburgh, there's meddling to some degree.
Whispers down the corridor reach the offices of power. No, I don't really see that being an issue. Because everything's all sort of central contracted, and you know, even I think sometimes the sort of tactics come from up on high. Like Gregor wants this, so play this guy more often, sort of thing. But maybe Franco maybe gets away with that. No, I'm going to swap Sione and Hugh Jones. Screw you, Tony. But no, I don't really think that. It's more a case of they don't know who they want in charge at Edinburgh, and also like to say that yes, the SRU maybe don't meddle in Glasgow. Maybe they should have more. When we lost all of our good players, and I remember once angrily tweeting about bringing back bin juice. Bin juice that also had rotten fish and cigarette butts tipped on it. You know, I just think we know for a while that the SRU, they've not been good at much, but in particular, you know, capitalising on relative successes of the pro teams. Because remember, we had been absolute muck from the beginning of the Pro 12 or the Borders League as it was, up until sort of Glasgow started making playoffs regularly. Then Edinburgh had a good couple of seasons under Cockerell. And then when, you know, while the iron has been hot, the SRU have not done much with it. They've just sold off the assets. But I don't think that, in particular, they meddle with coaching appointments. Well, they always do. But they do it equally for both sides.
Is there a wider issue here? I mean, I kind of it feels like a good time to talk about it because given everything that's happened with under 20s, is there a wider issue here, Johnny, that the SRU just don't have a plan at the minute? It does seem to be quite directionless Scottish rugby at the moment. The national team under Gregor Townsend, he's the most successful national coach we've ever had in terms of percentage of wins, and arguably, given it's during the pro era, those have been more challenging perhaps than some of the amateur era records. But we've got an under-20s that's dropped out of the top flight, have failed to qualify again, which has been beaten by Uruguay. You've got a Super Six that's been tinkered with. Was supposed to be the next big thing in Scottish rugby. Admittedly, COVID came along, but now we've got development teams being dropped in 3 different formats to the tournament, and now we've got appointments at Edinburgh that don't really seem to make sense. We had Franco Smith last season that came in and has been successful, but there were doubts at the start of it. I mean, it feels Scottish rugby at the minute, Johnny, to me feels a little bit rudderless.
Yeah, and like the way they've gone about some of the stuff that you've highlighted there, like Gregor Townsend got an extension, but he got an extension till after the Six Nations 2026, which is really weird. Doesn't make any sense to me at all. Franco, I think, was quite a late announcement last year, if I remember rightly, and sort of came out of nowhere. This Sean Everett one's come out of absolutely nowhere. I don't think we've run the Super Six in the same format twice. I think it's been different every single time. The teams have been different most times. The under-20s, I mean, I'm sure we'll come on to it, but I think there are some very, very, very good players in the under-20s that are being badly let down. They deserve better than what they've had this week. And I don't really see what the plan for it is, other than they're now a development team in the Super Six, which for the sprint series, Glasgow and Edinburgh were. They seem to have disappeared now. And now there's this development team where most of them, I think, are under-20s players who are attached to Glasgow or Edinburgh, from what I could see. I don't know why or how. The problem is that, like, from all of our point of view, Ian and I are Glasgow fans, Craig's an Edinburgh fan. You like the Borders, Cammy, so you've obviously got a little bit of interest in the Super Six with the Southern Knights and stuff. We are more interested in what's happening in Scottish rugby than your average Scottish rugby fan, and we're all sitting here saying we don't know what's happening, and that's a worry, because like you should have at least an idea of what your structure is.
Remember when they invented Super Six and they were like, "Oh yeah, it's not a development league," but now they've put under-20 sides and A sides in, so it's like, oh,
and then you get the likes of fairly high-profile young players getting added. What the transition players was that? Ross Thompson listed as a transition player for Ayr and the Ayrshire. Then you've got
Thompson, Macbeth, and Samuels were classed as Glasgow Warriors transition players,
and we don't know what that means.
But Rory Jackson, I don't think, was.
Yeah. But there's no explanations to what that means. What is a transition player? Is it someone that's transitioning back to the Super Six? Because that's a worry. And it's not like they haven't transitioned the other way, because most of them have had a decent amount of play. Or is it a player that's going to flip between the Super Six and Glasgow, in which case they used to do that back with the Prem? And I don't really understand what.
The thing is, Cammy, this is a typical large. If this was if the SRU are bordering on a big corporate company / local authority / NHS, where there's people on the bottom rung who are coaching and are playing, that are doing the best they possibly can with the hand that they've been dealt. They've got top people at the top who seem to know what they're doing, like Gregor Townsend. Some people may argue with me, and Franco Smith, and also Mark Dodson. Dodson, I think, has a clear vision of what he's doing. And then you've got this middle management area that just have no clue about either how to communicate, either how to, they're all full of giving you bullet points and mission statements and all these different things. But there's a new mission statement every couple of years, and we don't seem to know where we're going. And this is, as you've all said, we don't know where we're going with this. I know some of the coaches that are in the age grade system and are in the regional system, and they're fantastic coaches, and there's some great players coming through. The problem is that they're going away to academies and they're being looked after by academies and going away to their regions, but they're not getting to play games. For example, if you look at Callum Norrie, for example, who's a prop and he's listed as a Stirling Wolf, or Wolves or whatever you want to call him. He's hardly had any game time. Bearing in mind he has had a fairly nasty injury, but he hardly gets any game time when it comes to Stirling Wolves. Now, surely you want these guys going up against other props that have maybe never not got that far, and they're wanting them to be twisted inside out and tested by these guys before they go into the 20s games, etc. So you want to give them these experiences, and they're not getting them, and so.
Well, Jim Mallander's come out after the under-20s defeat and said he's been through the squad with a statistician, and only 5 or 6 are playing nearly every week. He said, how can we have one of our starting player who's only played 80 minutes of rugby in the last 3 or 4 months? He said, no wonder we're getting 12 injuries. We're not playing the quality and quantity of rugby, not exposing them at the right levels. Jim Mallander's been in this role for 4 years. That shouldn't come as a surprise to Jim Mallander.
Jim Mallander in that case he's like the hot dog. We're all trying to find out who did this guy.
Yeah.
That's your job, Jim. You're in charge of that.
Yeah, but if you look at the timeline,
you're now sitting there going, "Oh, it turns out I've not been doing my job for the last 4 years." Is basically what you've just said.
Look at the timeline though. He came in sort of there's practically 2 years of rugby lost to COVID. There was an entire season of Scottish domestic gone. Probably like a season and a half. I'll give him a wee touch of leeway. He's not had 13 years like the Tory government.
I would accept that everybody went through it. COVID wasn't isolated to Scotland, so everybody else has been able to continue with their under-20s development. And yeah, there will be some players who missed out on kind of a year or so, but it hasn't affected other nations in the same way that if that's the reason, then everybody would be the same.
That's his fact-finding mission. It's just that because he's had 4 years. I mean, he's only really had a year and a half, and there's not been about how many things has he overseen. So I'm not going to blame Jim Mallander quite yet.
I am,
but we've been
yeah, me too.
But the writing's been on the wall for a while. We get relegated from the under-20s. When was that? Was that 2 or 3 years ago? The World Cup.
2 years ago, I think we got relegated from the under-20s.
Yeah, and we lost. What is it? Like 16 games in a row. 15, 16 in a row.
But if Jim Mallander, when we got relegated from the under-20s 2 years ago, had said what he said today, I'd be like, all right, good, you're taking a hold of this. Nice to see that. The fact that happened 2 years ago and now today he's like, oh, hang on, I think I might have worked out what's wrong with this. Why didn't you do that 2 years ago?
Yeah, and how long is the Super?
Because it was his job then.
And as I said, the fact they've been tinkering with the Super 6 all this time as well, they still hasn't got a purpose, and there's been an opportunity there to do development sides and have young and some young players have come through. Some very good young players have come through the Super 6 and play for Edinburgh and Glasgow now. So I think there is a pathway there. It's just not being used and not being used properly.
I think you're on that. You're starting to hit. You're getting to the crux of the matter here, because I'm taking absolutely nothing away from the players. The players are dealing with what they're professional. Well, they're not professional yet, but they're on their way, and they'll be doing everything they possibly can because they want to play for Scotland in a senior role. So they'll be doing everything they possibly can to become the athletes that they need to be. So I'm taking absolutely nothing away from the players. I'm taking nothing away from the coaches. The coaches are doing the best they possibly can with the hand that they're dealt. My issue is just the fact of, I would have, for example, you've got fringe players in Edinburgh, fringe players in Glasgow that are under 20 Scotland, and they haven't been getting fed into the Super Six to play. They're being held on retainer in case they need to be a backup player if someone goes sick or whatever. So they're travelling to Wales or they're travelling to Ireland. That is not developing those players. That's not giving them the game time they need. And then you've got the Super Six, and as I say before, you're looking at an under 20s prop who should be getting a lot of game time, has not been getting, and it's not just Callum. I'm only talking about Callum because I follow him a little bit because Johnny and I both know him, and you want these players to be getting more and more game time against teams who want to bend them into different shapes in the scrum, and you want them to get all these experiences so that when he comes up against a gnarly prop that's the same age as him, he knows how to deal with them. And I don't know if he's fully 100% getting that,
Well, Xander Ferguson talked about that, didn't he? See, Xander Ferguson talked about going and playing for Hawks and getting absolutely bent double by old props week in, week out before he then, went and played for Glasgow. So you can't just walk straight into pro rugby and expect to, you need to go through something. You need to go through some form of rugby before that on a regular basis. Johnny, sorry, I cut in there with my...
No, and you're absolutely right. And the most damning thing about the whole thing is that it's slightly different angles, but a very similar issue. This is the exact same thing that we sat here 9 months ago and said about the women's team. The players are trying the best they can. The coaches are trying the best they can. They're given everything that they've got to get to further the cause of Scottish rugby in the under-20s, in the women's, to get themselves the opportunities that they deserve. And the systems and the support is not in place and is not the right thing. And there's only one person to blame for that, and that's the SRU.
Do you know when the pathways did work? Scott Johnson. Everybody was down on him, but he had a plan. He had a vision. He set up the academies, and we under that. I'm not about to blow smoke up Scott Johnson's bum, but he had a vision, and it wasn't popular at the time, but he forced through some pretty significant changes in the pathways in Scotland, and it produced it's produced some sustainable growth in Scottish rugby. The problem is he left, and I think we don't have anybody who is in overall control of pathways in Scotland. Jim Mallander's role has been changed slightly. You've got lots of different fingers in lots of different pies, Ian, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you have an overall vision.
Well, I think somebody like Keith Russell maybe had a vision, but it didn't align with certain other people's visions. I mean, Johnson, there was that, when he was there, that was sort of like little, I suppose we would almost call them our golden generation, even though they've not won a lot. Your Russell, Hogg, Johnny Gray, that coming through at Glasgow at the same time. Edinburgh, you had Gilco, similar age guys coming through, and things were going quite well. But the well is drying up. We're losing more and more people to other sports. The registered players keeps going down. And our primary recruitment area now seems to be South Africa. Even then, we were talking about Super Six players that have progressed. I was like, right, the two main ones I can think of that have gone up or proven to be successful at Glasgow Warriors are Johnny Matthews, who was well over the under-20 limit, and Tom Jordan, who's a Kiwi. So this is right. Maybe it's good for developing players. A lot of them have gone down to England, and even you had what's his name, the boy that played open side for Bulls, Jari Fantini. He ended up at Treviso. But again, none of these are under 20s guys. All the star players haven't been under 20s lads. So we kind of know there's been root and branch failure for a while. But who is stepping up to do it, who is the development person. It's like when we were talking about Ruth Davidson the other week, you know, you get people coming in, they get such vague roles. Even when we were talking about Jim Malander, what was his role to begin with? Or
Well, he was a direct replacement for Scott Johnson. He was director of rugby. That's what he was brought in as. And I think that over time that role has changed. So Jim Malander was effectively Gregor Townsend's boss, and now he's been downgraded to Gregor Townsend's
scout
equal.
Yeah, he's director of high performance or something, is he not? Or just performance.
And I think that's it. I think I think there has been the shuffling of the deck chairs makes me think that there is and I think it's come along with the governance review, is that there is an attempt to make sure that not one person has overall control of one thing, so that the control is then at the very top. And it just means that you spread everybody else thinly. And I don't think that's not benefiting Scottish Rugby at the minute, because nobody has that. Nobody has an overall vision of what Scottish Rugby is supposed to be, how we're going to deliver it, what the long-term future of the sport looks like. And we can't, you know, COVID played a part in that, but you can't keep blaming COVID.
No, it just seems to smack of this whole thing of we've all been in meetings, and I'm sure there's people out there that have all been in meetings where you come into a meeting and you sit down and you have a fairly frank conversation about what's needing to change in the business and how you want to move forward, and then you come back to the same meeting in 6 months' time and they start talking about exactly the same things because nothing's been done. And that seems to be the way that the SRU, you know, they're very, very happy to throw out new fancy slogans and, you know, a new top that's special edition with a comic book and things like that, but they're not dealing with problems that are there. It seems to be papering over cracks.
That's all right. That's allowed pre-watershed. I'll allow that slip.
Right.
But I mean, even like,
Excellent
I
Freudian
think
slip as well.
the other kind of issue that people have kind of touched upon in the comments when we've put stuff out on Twitter is the kind of scouting network in Scotland. And I wonder, and this is a general one, and this is based on anecdotal feedback that we've had over the years and we've had recently, is that the scouting network in Scotland is to a degree, not 100%, but to a degree, about what club you play for and who you know and who knows you, and who those are the players that are given priority. Those are the ones that are given the opportunities. If you're an exceptional talent, you'll get through. But for those that may take time to mature or take time to grow, the club you play for, the people you know, are important. Whereas I think the Exile scouting network that operates in England very effectively, I don't think, geographically, because it's different and because I think it's harder to be known in those areas, I do wonder whether or not that works more efficiently purely on you turn up to these camps, you get your chance to play. If we think you're good, we'll keep an eye on you, and you keep coming back to the camps. So you get players coming through that way, because it's a much more open system, because it's, we're running some Exile camps, come along and train and we'll watch you, see what you're about. Whereas in Scotland, it's, I'm going along to a certain game at a certain time to see what I think of this lad, and I'll only go to certain games in certain places. Is that kind of your experience of things, Johnny?
Yeah, I'm sort of like younger, well, both older and younger end of that in terms of playing and coaching. But there does certainly seem to be a well-travelled path, let's put it that way. Especially in our area, where once you get to sort of under 15s, under 16s, a few players from each team start going to Midlands camps. And then at the Midlands camps, some of those players start going to certain schools. And then they become a bit more interesting than some of the other players. And there are players that Craig will know, having coached under 18s this year, that maybe missed out on an under 15s, under 16s opportunity with the Midlands. And then by the time they got to under 18s, were a star performer on the team. And it just seems that we need to think outside the box a little bit. It's quite a sort of established route, and I don't think it's as effective as it probably could be.
Yeah, it's, my experiences are very much down that line, Johnny, and I think we also have to be aware that there doesn't seem to be, I think, well, Finn Russell is probably the only one you could probably point at and say that there doesn't seem to be anything out there for players that are maybe 2021. They've missed all the camps at youth level and things like that, and they've missed all these different chances because they were either developing, growing, they may have had bad injuries at time, or they may have had a girlfriend and decided, or a boyfriend and decided to go and not take rugby seriously at that point in time. But once they've come into adult rugby, there doesn't seem to be a mechanism for them to get picked up by the clubs. For example, if you look at Alex Dombrandt, he played for England universities and got picked up that way. He hadn't even been looked at when he was in youth rugby, and so I don't think he was even playing rugby, at 16. So those are the sort of things that we have to. They have to kind of sort out, because it seems to be very much there's only one way to go, and you've got to be picked up about 14 or 15, start going to your camps, as Johnny says. Then the funnel starts, and then they start getting more and more pressure, and they have to be going down their different programs and building muscle and all these different things and eating correctly, and all of a sudden you have your Scotland players at the end of that funnel. There seems to be no way of bringing in other players that get the opportunity.
For example, there's a player at Howe who, as far as I remember, and it was a wee while ago, played a little bit under 15s, under 16s, under 18s, was away for a little while, came back, was kind of on the verges of the team towards the start of last season, and then by the end of last season, started for Cali in all 3 games of the inter-districts, and then this season is the first 15 captain, and he's 22, 23, I think.
Yeah.
And missed a massive bit in the middle of where Craig says, you're going to Cali camps at under 16s, at under 18s. Fraser missed all that. He's appeared back this year, had a phenomenal year, ended up as a starter for Cali, won the inter-district, his first 15 captain this year, and because he's missed this kind of chunk of under 16s, under 18s, he's probably completely lost to a sort of wider system.
Yeah, it's not great, and we go on.
That just sounds smacks of poor scouting network, or a very myopic scouting network.
I think myopic's probably the word. That's certainly the kind of feedback you get. That if you face, the feedback we've had, again anecdotally, is if your face doesn't fit, or you're not picked up at a certain age, then you're done, and they won't look at you again unless you're an exceptional talent like Finn Russell, or you come through a different system. I mean, you look at Chris Harris. Chris Harris was playing university rugby at Northumbria and playing a bit for Tynedale and got picked up by Falcons. Chris Harris wasn't picked up at 14, 15. Chris Harris was picked up in his early 20s by Falcons because he was playing locally and decided to give it a go. And I think a club like Falcons, from kind of my understanding, because I know kind of speak to people that have links with them, is they're much more open to picking up guys in their 20s who are playing for local clubs who've got a who've got the talent. I mean, Adam Radwan, I think, was picked up from a local club in the northeast, and went to be on the verge. He hasn't come through the systems as such. Just said to his head coach one day, "I quite fancy giving it a go." He says, "All right, on you go. I'll give let's talk about eating properly, coaching properly." It wasn't I'm 14 and I'm going through the system. So the players that we have picked up late, apart from Finn Russell, the players that have, I think, maybe come along as late bloomers in Scotland have come through other systems. They haven't come through the Scottish system.
No, and you also have to look at the fact that you've got 14-year-old, 16-year-old players who are going to Cali camps and things like that in our area, and they might get to a point where they've had enough of it because all they know is it's training, and they get to a point where they go, "Nah, I've had enough of that," and so it needs. If it's fully, I know for a fact that I've had a couple of not scouts, but Cali coaches down to watch games that I've had kids playing in, and you get an email through saying, "This is at this time, who do you want to put forward to the camps?" And they go to a camp and they get looked at, and it is pretty brutal. If they can't pass, they can't tackle, then they're done. They're not getting. And Cali are looking at, and they're trying to change things. They're trying to give more people chances, but the problem that they're all probably suffering, from what I can tell, is just people on the ground. People at games, people get, because the money's not infinite, and so there's a yeah, I'm pretty grumpy about how the development pathway works, but you can't just be grumpy at the people that are working within the development pathway, because they're having to deal with a large amount of things that are going on, and a lot of that's to do with money,
Yeah, and that's it. And I can't criticize people for going to see the games that they see, because the games they're at. That's if they're not being supported to go and travel further afield, or there isn't that net, that somebody else hasn't created that network, and people aren't being listened to in the right places, then that's not the fault of the individual scouts. That's a fault elsewhere. I mean, I don't want to feel, I think we're often criticised for saying we don't celebrate Scottish rugby on this podcast, and I think the response to that is, when there's something to celebrate, then we we will do. It's just, at the moment, everything's a little bit dour and doom and gloom, and we talk about failings at the top, and then last week we've had the announcement that there's the review into Siobhan Cadigan's the treatment ahead of her death has been completed by the SRU, but they are awaiting further legal advice before they make any of the findings public. And again, it does just feel like there is one thing after another, and it is that it doesn't feel like there's any pressure on at the top. There's pressure on the top from kind of the likes of us and social media a little bit, but I can't. It's hard to say, and the media are asking these questions, but I think perhaps the likes of Mark Dodson get away with it because rugby isn't a high-profile sport in Scotland. If that had happened to a women's football player, an international women's football player, I think we'd be having a different. The conversation would be very different.
Yeah, absolutely. And somebody like Heather Dewar is doing the absolute Lord's work, keeping it in the conscious as much as she possibly can, because, like you say, there isn't a massive amount of interest, and try as people in rugby circles might to make a big deal about rugby in Scotland, if we're being realistic with ourselves, it is a long way behind football, and there isn't the interest. And so we are in serious danger of things like the Siobhan Cadigan review falling through the cracks if people like Heather aren't consistently banging the drum for it. And I think the SRU need to realise that as much as it is probably quieter than, like you say, it would be in football, it is not going away. And a lot of people were keen to point out to us last week that it's standard practice, if you've got an ongoing legal case, to not give away any information, blah, blah, blah. Like, fine, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not massively interested in your legalese ins and outs. That might well be true. But if the SRU hadn't spectacularly dropped the ball so many times already, I don't think anyone would be making that point. And that's the sort of thing you have to realise, is that the saying we've completed the review and now we're not talking about it because we're waiting for our lawyers, it's fine. It probably is the right thing. I'm not a legal expert. If a legal expert says that's the right thing, I'm sure it is. In isolation, fine. But this has been a series of fumbles for 2-3 years now. And so you don't just get away with going, oh, yeah, sorry, lawyers say we can. If that was the first thing, fine, but it's not. It's the 15th, 16th.
I also think, and we got in a bit of a back and forth with a lawyer on Twitter. If everything was fine in the review and nothing had gone wrong, why would your lawyer tell you to shut up? They tell you release everything. It exonerates you completely. Let's put it out in the public. So that would suggest that something, it might be minor, but something somewhere has not been as it should be.
See, I thought this topic of conversation would come up, and instantly my mind went back to the Keith Russell case. And after that, then it was like Dawson was like, you know what, well, yeah, we'll have more transparency. And then there was a podcast episode where you and John did sort of, we'll read out the redacted bits because half of it is redacted. It's just, and like he's Ross saying, it's an ongoing thing. We're speaking to our legal team. Why didn't they say that from the start? The rest of it was just silence. Like, look, here's the thing: we're doing this and this and this. If you tell people, that us that are interested in it because we think there's been a systemic failure. If we're and there's thousands of people wondering about this, and you just keep silent about it, why don't you just say, look, here's the thing. We are doing a review about it. This is what we can tell you. We can't tell you more at the moment, but we will try it because it's the secrecy which makes people think.
And the reviews only happen because of public pressure and pressure from the family. That's the only reason the review happened. It wasn't because of anything else. And they still dropped. And the review's only going to, I say only. The review is looking at the way that Siobhan was treated prior to her death through the SRU systems. What the review is not looking at, as far as I can tell, is what the SRU did after that. How they treated her, how they treated the women's team, the kind of allegations that have come out of that, the kind of lack of aftercare for the rest of the team, the fact that we had numerous failings to mark Siobhan's death in a meaningful way at Murrayfield until in the end we got kind of it was shoved on at halftime when everyone was on at the bars during the Six Nations. That to me is as much of a failure as everything. It's a big part of it, and it's not going to be addressed by that review. And if the review does say nothing's gone wrong, then again, Teflon Man it's a bit of a dull kind of thing. But Mark Dodson, you wonder what it would take for Mark Dodson to be given the heave ho at the SRU, because
even something like the Players Association putting out a quote that purported to be from the women's team, where the players then had to put together a coordinated social media attack saying, actually, no, we didn't say that. We don't want our names associated with this. That is terrible.
Yeah,
considering what the players were going through when that happened.
So when somebody's saying, the media haven't been reporting it, I think there's a couple of guys who have, like Rob Robertson. He's questioned it a few times. But like we were saying, obviously rugby's not as big a sport as football.
I think the press. Yeah. I mean, I think the press are on board. The press are on board with things are not well in the SRU, and I think like you said, they've got David Barnes, Rob Robertson, Mark Palmer. You've got Heather Dewar. You've got all of these journalists are aware that something is going on and all is not right. It's just, but nothing is done.
But again, though, and let's just make this clear, because we've come across it ourselves. If you do not pay homage to the SRU correctly, you're cut off. And those media, the guys that you've just mentioned, the girl and the guys that you just mentioned, I call them guys because it's just a generic term for me. They write incredibly good stuff, and they're keeping pressure on people, but they have to traverse the line of, the SRU cutting them off. And I
think they're well. I don't think they do. I think that the issue with that is they're big. They're the big guns in the media, and the SRU cannot cut off the Times, and it can't cut off the Daily Mail, and it can't. David Barnes, although he writes for the Offside Line, but he also writes for a lot of other publications as well. So they cannot cut those off. They can cut off other kind of more minor media presences, such as ourselves, or Stone Wallace, when we kind of get the opportunity to kind of things look promising for a bit. Oh, that will work. Then you never hear anything else back, and you hear whisperings back about the reaction to it. I think it's easier to cut someone off like us because we're an irritation. You can't cut off the what is it? The Times is the paper of letters. You can't do that. Nobody can do. That Newcastle United tried it, and it didn't go spectacularly well for them. I think the SRU tried it in Japan, where they got their in-house writer to start writing glorified match reports like someone from North Korea.
I forgot about that. That was brilliant.
Scotland's glorious failure against Ireland in the 5 reasons why Scotland's glorious failure against Ireland is a sign that everything is wonderful at S.
We must accept our rubbishness for the time being.
So I take your point. They have to traverse it a little bit, Craig. But I do think they They do a good job of holding. I just think the SRU has no option but to go with them. And I think the fact that Jim Malander apparently sarcastically thanked the media for their support following his press conference the other day.
Rob, in his defence, has been absolutely rabid going after Jim Malander the last couple of days.
But this is the problem, though, and this is sorry, Johnny, I didn't mean to cut you off. It pisses me off. Sorry,
That's
upsets
allowed.
me. Okay, it's this whole thing off. The minute there's a slight criticism, oh, thanks for your support. Oh, nobody seems to be. All of a sudden, the SRU have this almost teenager reaction of, oh, you never love me, you all hate me.
That's because they're a bunch of narcissists, Craig.
All we want is a little bit of communication and to embrace a little bit of doubt. And then if we doubt you a little bit, you can come and talk to us about it. That's not a big issue. I don't see it as a big issue, but they don't want to come and talk to us because it's not that the fact that you'll ask hard questions or you'll overreact on things. It's more the fact of they don't want to say something that then maybe gets blown out of proportion and they have to deal with it. They just want to be ultra safe. And I just feel that they could be, if they actually got involved with conversations with people would buy into the SRU that little bit more. And we would actually love it, and they would get the love that they're looking for.
And the thing is that, like, Craig and I, at least, and plenty of other people who are involved in plenty of podcasts and media and things, we are paying members of Scottish rugby clubs. So, like, the SRU isn't like a closed off business. They are the union in charge of club rugby in Scotland, and if we're paying members of clubs, we're well within our rights to say we want to have some questions answered about how this is being run.
Yeah, I'm a member of Berwick Rugby Club because I want you guys are members of Howard Fife. We're part, we're part of the union. We've got a voice, and it's just that they choose to. But it continues to be a worry. And, I'm not going to apologise to anybody that was tuning into this podcast to hopefully get a lovely preview of Scotland versus Italy or the World Cup, because that's coming next for our Patreons in the second half of the podcast.
You pay for the fun stuff.
But there's a whistle-stop tour of all the problems there are with Scottish rugby right now in 57 minutes.
Tune in next week.
You enjoyed it.
We have had a few weeks off. It's been building up.
It has been. Look, we will say we're going to leave it there for this week. If you want, as patrons, we will do a quick kind of preview of Scotland versus Italy at the weekend, and catch up some other wee bits of kind of news.
I've had a dramatic failure.
To add?
I've had a dramatic failure today that I've got to admit to everybody, but we're saving it for the patrons.
Oh, and also, where's Dougie Donnelly?
Yeah.
Where was Dougie Donnelly?
Where's Dougie Donnelly?
It's a good one too.
Let's get into that in the Patreon podcast. Now, that's it for this week. We'll be back next week. We have Banderscotch 2 coming very soon. It's very exciting. That is our Create Your Own Adventure. You are the cultural attaché to the Scottish Rugby Union team during the French World Cup. Can you steer them with your cultural advice to World Cup glory? And you get to play that. That is in development. It's nearly finished. We did Banderscotch 1 during Japan. That was heaps of fun.
I still remember how instantly I died in Banderscotch 1. I think I ate the sushi. I think I gave Greg the sushi. That was me, like, before the first game even started. The blowfish.
It was Gregor Townsend you killed.
Yeah, killed.
You told him about the poison sushi. There you go.
Yeah.
Johnny, bring back Fern McGinty.
Yeah. On that note, that is it from us this week. And it's goodbye from me and goodbye from Ian, Johnny, and Craig.
Bon Wednesday.
Just got to bear with us now if you're on the Patreon podcast while we slowly hang